Hello again, everyone. This is Steve Kallas, speaking of sports. I'm here with Janelle Allbritton, the publisher of WestchesterCountyPost.com, and also a woman with a master's degree in public health, which will come in very handy as we attack the coronavirus debacle, if you will, in Major League Baseball that happened literally 3-4 days into the new revised 60-game baseball season. I'll give you a brief summary of what happened, and I'll turn it over to Janelle. But we're recording this early Tuesday afternoon, so a lot has happened. You probably know some of the story. We'll give you what's up to date right now. So the Marlins have had a slew of positive tests. They originally had one, just their catcher, on Friday. Then they had 3 more on Sunday. The starting pitcher was scratched. They played the game nonetheless with 4 positives. Those guys were isolated. After the game, the Marlins were tested again. They got 7 more positives returned on Monday for a total of 11. And then from Monday to Tuesday, they were tested again, and they now have a total of 15 players positive and 2 coaches. To briefly turn to the other teams, the Phillies were tested once yesterday. Their first group of tests, no positives. The Yankees had come down to play Philly. The Yankees have not been tested, but there were no games played in Philadelphia. The Yankee game, Yankee-Philly in Philly, canceled Monday, canceled Tuesday. Baltimore was supposed to fly to Miami and play Miami. Those 2 games were canceled. And right now, as we talk early Tuesday afternoon, the Baltimore Orioles and the Yankees are going to play 2 games. And the Phillies will not play at least until Friday, and the Miami Marlins will not play at least until Friday. So there was clearly an outbreak within the Miami Marlins team, and I'm going to turn it over to Janelle to maybe she can explain to us how you could have literally 15 positive baseball players on one team 4 days into the Major League Baseball season. Janelle? This is not funny.
It's either laugh or cry for me, so I'm choosing to laugh because while I hope that no more athletes get infected and that the infected ones do not suffer at all, I just don't understand how this happened in the first place when it was preventable, as in just not play. But that is not an option. That is not an option. And so I just find it very telling that the first team to have such an outbreak is from Miami. Makes perfect sense to me. Miami, if it were a country, it's number 4 on the planet in terms of infections per 100,000. And Governor DeSantis leading the charge right towards the cliff and with no signs of slowing down. So it's fitting that it's the Miami team that is suffering this. So let's look at the numbers again. 1 infected player that they knew of went from 1 to 4, then from 4 to 11, and now 11 to 15.
Yep.
Out of a total of how many? 30?
30 players in the 3-man travel squad, so 33 altogether.
All right, so a third of them are now basically out of the game for at least 2 weeks. They have to be isolated. So again, I don't know if I emphasized this in the former video, but the difference between isolation and quarantine is this. If you're infected, you get isolated. If you have been in contact with someone who is infected, you get quarantined. So quarantine has to do with a time period. It's a wait and see time period to wait and see if you test positive or if you come if you come down with symptoms. Before we had the science for testing blood back in the 19th century, all we could do was wait and see if somebody got sick. And so that's why a lot of times the sailors had to stay on the ship just off port for 40 days. And that's where the term quarantine comes from. So fortunately, we're not doing the 40 days anymore. We're doing 14 days. And that still seems to be too long for some. So consider also that how often the testing is being done and how fast the turnaround time is on the test results. So you can say, oh, we get tested every day. But if it takes 5 days to get those test results, and you're living life as per usual, it's possible that you are not only positive and don't know it, but you're also infecting others during that time. So waiting to get the result before you quarantine doesn't make a lot of sense, and it seems to me that's what's happening with the Major League Baseball.
Well, a few things there. I know you suggested they should definitely test every day. They were not. They were testing every other day. Now I think in the midst of the Miami/Philadelphia problem, now they're testing every day. Maybe you'll say that's a little, too late, or maybe it's better late than never. The other problems that are arising now is Miami is still in Philadelphia. As you pointed out to me off camera, they can't get on a plane, or at least the 15 guys who are positive and the 2 coaches for a total of 17, they can't get on a plane. And
they could charter a plane, they can certainly travel, but at the risk of, contaminating the plane and everyone else and infecting everyone on the plane. So if they charter a plane and then make sure that it's properly, processed and disinfected and sanitized and ultraviolet lit and whatever, fumigated, whatever they do to make sure that it's treated so that the next passengers and pilots and crew do not get infected.
And the other thing that you mentioned, which we know is the standard, the isolation and the quarantine for those who are near the person who was infected, which, by the way, with 15 positives, you have to think it's the whole team. It's all 33 guys, I would think. But you talked about 14 days, and we'll go back to the prior video where Commissioner Manfred on CNN said, yeah, our experts said we don't have to wait 14 days. And it looks like they wait a certain amount of time, and then if you the player, gets 2 negatives within the 24 hours plus a minute, then you can come back. And they've already talked about having players come back earlier than 14 days. I know you're against that. I know that's not the normal rules.
Let me getting 2 tests within 24 hours, was that 2?
Not within 24
days in a
hours. 24 hours plus a minute. It can't be within 24 hours. It has to be a little more than 24 hours. So they would test at 6 a.m. on Monday and at 6:01 a.m. on Tuesday, is my guess.
I see.
They can't be within 24 hours. It has to be 24 hours apart, is the way they say it. The other thing, before I throw it back to you, now, Rob Manfred was interviewed on MLB Network. We saw the job he did with Sanjay Gupta and Anderson Cooper on CNN. I know you weren't happy. Even I wasn't happy with it. And now he's kind of already in a defensive mode, literally 4 days into the baseball season. But I do want to read one quote that he said, among many. I encourage people, to go to MLB.com. Tom Verducci, top baseball writer, interviewing Manfred yesterday, Monday. But I'll just read one quote from that MLB Network quote, and this is Rob Manfred, the Commissioner of Baseball. I don't put this in the nightmare category. We don't want any players to get exposed. It's not a positive thing, but I don't see it as a nightmare. We built the protocols to allow us to continue to play. That's why we have expanded rosters. That's why we have the expanded pools of additional players. We think we can keep people safe and continue to play. And I'll turn it over to you, Janelle, but this is after, I guess at the time, he only thought 11 players had tested positive. And then again, the next day, now we find out it's 15 players who have tested positive. So I think he's trying to put, personally, lipstick on a pig, because this looks like not only a disaster, but it looks like maybe the beginning of having other things. As you know, Texas has a couple of teams. California has 4 teams with the 2 in Los Angeles. Arizona has the Diamondbacks. Florida has the Marlins and the Tampa Bay Rays. So we're talking about, 7, 8 teams that are either coming out of or teams are flying into like the 4 worst states in the country and 4 of the biggest hot spots on the planet.
Yeah, so back to the basic mission of public health is to, 1, prevent the preventable, and 2 is to increase the quality of life by decreasing the 5 Ds: death, disease, disability, discomfort, and dissatisfaction. The other 2 Ds that I add are disrespect and despair. So the disrespect that I'm seeing for the athletes is my perception, and I find it very shocking. To have a second lineup and a third lineup ready to just step in and take the place of the starters, who I'm told are the cream of the crop for the team.
Correct, for each team.
And then act like that's, the game will go on, right? Let the games begin and the show must go on. And treating the athletes like so much interchangeable parts, like a car part, is not being true to the fans who really, have their favorite athletes that they follow. Would it be the same for the fans if it's the second string lineup and none of the, usual players are on the field? What would the viewership be? What would the support for that be? I don't know if the MLB has really thought this through, that the fans won't notice or care. Or are we just so starved to watch a sports game that we don't really care who's in the uniform?
Well, I think we're starved to watch it, but obviously you want the best players to play. Manfred did talk about the fact that maybe if Miami becomes non-competitive. Now, if they've already lost 15 of their top 33 players, we don't know exactly who. You have to give permission. If the player does not give permission to be identified, the joke is obviously, though, then they go on the injured list and they don't say what the injury is, and everybody kind of knows it's the coronavirus, especially now that there are 15 Miami Marlins. I know Alfaro, the catcher, who was the first guy on Friday alone, they identified him, but he had to give his permission. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, which you've again discussed off camera, is the notion that if everybody had worn masks, and I'll take a step back, the Marlins had played the Atlanta Braves Tuesday and Wednesday in 2 exhibition games before the season had started. And both of Atlanta's catchers, now, I know one of them played for sure. I don't know if they both play. I don't know if Darno had played. But Flowers played, and both of them missed the opening weekend because they were positive with the coronavirus. And as you've pointed out to me, when the catcher is catching, shouldn't he be wearing a mask? The umpire behind him is generally wearing a mask. And then the 9 or 10 or 12 or 15 guys who bat are literally, there's no chance they're 6 feet away. Maybe they're 2 feet away.
They're a bat length away.
And you seem to think it would be a great idea, and maybe baseball is considering this now before it gets too out of control, but it sounds like you think that everybody, at least batter, catcher, umpire there, if not everybody in the game. We mentioned Didi Gregorius before, Philly shortstop, who has a kidney ailment. He wears a mask all the time. He's playing great. I'm not saying it's because he's wearing a mask, but he wears a mask on the field, in the batter's box all the time, because he has an underlying condition and he's worried. So what would you think? Is there a way, now that this has already happened, 15 people on one team, and the commissioner's like, it's not a nightmare. We kind of thought something like this was going to happen. I don't think he thought 15 positives in like 3 days. But what do you think, what can be done so this doesn't happen again? Because if this continually happens and they have to cancel games, not 1 game, but 2 games a day for 2, 4, 6 days, how are they going to get through a season they've literally just started?
I think now's a good time to offer my services to Rob Manfred. I would be very honored to be your public health advisor and help shape the policy, because clearly something went wrong. I have a lot of questions in relation to the Marlins team situation. I'm assuming that the answers to any question I would have would be no. For example, were they taking the protocol? Were they practicing the protocol of distancing, of masking, of good hygiene? How is it that you go from 1 to 15 within a week when New York already went through what we went through? And I say we because we live in New York. And we saw the very painful situation of the lockdown, and knowing that 10 to 15% of the COVID deaths were accounted for by the nurses and doctors taking care of the COVID patients. And so it was really hard to watch, and we were living through it, and we understood the importance of shutting down big events and distancing and masking and standing in line 6 feet apart. We did it, and our data will show that we did it right. And being the first is always the hardest. So there were missteps along the way because we didn't have the information. We didn't know how this virus acts. We didn't know what all the symptoms were. And some patients just got overlooked because they didn't have the symptoms that were being screened for. But by now, we're in the end of July, and there's no reason why there should be these flashpoints. This is not an ember. This was a matchbook setting on fire. You light one match in a matchbook, what happens? The whole thing lights up very quickly. And that's the Marlins. And there's no reason for it. And it's very frustrating for me. And either I laugh or I cry about it. So I'm just choosing to laugh. And again, I would love to work with Mr. Manfred and build something that would work. So we're seeing games being canceled, and you said only the commissioner can officially cancel games.
I believe he's the final decision maker.
Final decision maker. So what is driving those decisions that he's officially making? Is he rubber stamping them? Is he unable to overcome the objections to moving forward? Is it the players who are refusing to play? Is it the owners saying, nah, it's not worth it? I value my athletes more than this? Is it the coaches saying, no, I don't see how we can protect our athletes and play at our peak? There's a lot of questions I have, and that you've done research, you weren't able to find the criteria. I mean, we can't even find the criteria from the CDC that Manfred keeps referring to.
Well, he said he had experts at CNN who were unlike any experts you or even I had ever even heard of, who said you don't need the 14-day quarantine, which again, still to this day sounds like I've never heard anyone on TV, any expert anywhere, say you don't. But they have some people who do, apparently. But I want to leave you with a couple of other things that have happened. And first of all, now, you know, things were going down in the country, and it looked like when baseball and basketball and hockey next week, or even the end of this week, they're all going to start. And it looked like things were going down, especially in the Northeast, which is now, I'll say, good, with our fingers crossed that it doesn't go bad again. But now that we've had this incredible spike, you know, there's a real question. 60, 70,000 cases nationwide every day, over 1,000 deaths a day in like 5 of the last 6 days. This is horrific, and some people will say there shouldn't have been baseball at all. The other thing, originally there was an idea, and I'll leave you with 2 things. Originally there was an idea that baseball was going to play in a bubble. The American League was going to be in Florida, which you can understand why they've stepped back from that, and the National League was going to be in Arizona, which you understand why they stepped back from that. But I want to leave you with the final word. David Price, our viewers will know, superstar pitcher, signed a big contract with the Dodgers. He opted out, which you could do, you're not going to get paid, but he opted out and said essentially, look, it's not really worth the risk, I'm a little worried, blah, blah, blah. And after this thing happened, he came out with a very strong anti-Manfred quote where he literally said, you said you were going to have the players' best interests at heart, you clearly don't. Tom Ferducci even asked him about it last night, and he said, well, I disagree with David Price. You know everything. You heard the interview. Everything is the players, the safety. But again, 3 or 4 days in, you go from 1 positive to 15 positives. Games are canceled. Teams that weren't even in the games are canceled. They're now having the teams that weren't in the games playing each other, which they're changing the schedule on the fly, which is, of course, very, very unusual.
It's a mess.
It's a mess. So given the fact the nation's problems, a lot of people think baseball, what sports? My answer to that had been in World War II, baseball offered to stop playing, and FDR wrote a letter to the commissioner of baseball, which became very famous, and said, look, we need baseball. And, you know, baseball was king back then, of course, not like it is now, although baseball is still very popular. Nowadays, I kind of went with the argument when the cases were all going down that we could use it because we've all been pretty much at home for 3 or 4 months, especially as you described in New York, where it was horrific, and New Jersey and Southern Connecticut. Now these are like the good areas, if you will, and the other places have gone, as the president said, it's only the South and the West. But of course, the South and the West is half the country. So when you look at the big picture, given what's happened, 1,000 deaths a day, it doesn't look like it's slowing down. It might be plateauing at 1,000 deaths a day. That's horrific. We're in America. Coupled with the more micro, which is David Price, a superstar player who opted out, not playing, says you guys didn't take care of the players like you promised. And he can debate it with the commissioner all he wants. What we have 4 days in is 15, almost half of the team, the 33-man traveling squad, in literally the first 4 days of the season. So I'll leave the final words to you, but that strikes me as very troublesome.
Well, I hope that Americans are learning a lesson in logarithmic math. When something is this infectious, you can easily go from 1 to 100. If you double once a day, you go from 3 to 100 in 5 days. So to minimize, oh, it's only 15 and they're in the same team, that is not something to minimize or take any comfort in. That should be a cautionary tale as to how fast a team can be wiped out if they're not doing the right things and or if they are doing the wrong things. So it's truly not rocket science. I don't know how this spread in Marlins, and I don't know how many others they're infecting. It could easily go to 100 people infected in connection with the Marlin team. So I don't know if they're doing contact tracing. It doesn't seem like it from the video that we saw with Sanjay Gupta and Anderson Cooper. Manfred was really weak on that explanation. And I don't know who's advising him, but this isn't the way it should be done. And so he can give me a call anytime, and I'd be happy to help him out because yeah, this is not the way it's done. It's facepalm.
So we're going to see what happens. You know, a lot of people think they should get ready to stop the season now if there are more outbreaks like this, where you go from 1 to 15 in 3 or 4 days, and now it's going to be 6 or 8 games that are going to be canceled. And again, we're in the first week of the season. So we'll have to see what happens. Obviously, it's not the start they wish they had gotten off to. But, you know, maybe your idea of everybody wearing a mask, I don't know if they can do a mandatory mask wearing, as many of the Republican governors won't do in this country, but they won't do it in baseball. Certainly there's been, maybe they recommend it. Again, Didi Gregorius and a few other players are wearing it. The umpires are wearing it. But I'm going to say 97% of the players are not wearing it. So that may lead to further problems. We don't know how this started. We don't know if we'll find out. They say they are contact tracing, but they're contact tracing. There's only one contact tracer per team, which could be a problem, especially the problem with the baseball players, as I've discussed with Joe Staszak down on Philly ESPN, is basketball's in the bubble, the NHL is in the bubble. The NFL, which could be the biggest problem of all, they're just starting to report now. They haven't even done anything yet. But baseball, the home team goes home every night after every home game, 60-game season. So they're always going to be exposed to other people, not just their family. Maybe they stop in their car to get gas.
To his pregnant wife.
Whatever. Well, I mean, and that's the problem. Or, you know, your elderly parents who are living with you because you're a wealthy baseball player, or whatever the factors are. I think there are just a lot of other factors that maybe weren't accounted for. Any final words?
Manfred needs help. I hope he gets the help that he needs. And I hope that the athletes don't allow the political climate to affect their decisions when it comes to protecting themselves. Because wearing a mask is effective, it does work. We've got technology that shows how effective wearing a mask is in reducing infection rate. So I just don't understand why someone wouldn't take care of themselves. But I do understand that this has become the most politicized healthcare issue that I have ever seen, more than abortion and more than the HIV/AIDS epidemic. Because COVID cuts across all the lines of, you know, sexual preference and lifestyle, morality, religion, that are involved in, you know, the gay lifestyle or the choice to terminate a pregnancy. None of those moral, religious issues come to play when it comes to COVID. And so what is laid bare by COVID is our willingness as a nation to allow a few people who are in political positions to influence our willingness to follow the science and take precautionary measures to prevent infection. I just don't understand it.
This is Steve Kallas speaking of sports, along with Janelle Allbritton, the publisher of WestchesterCountyPost.com and a master of public health. We'll see you the next time.